Hi, I'm Leslie Vetter, and this is Michelle Daughter, and we're going to talk to you guys about query survival basics. So a little bit about us. I'm a YA fantasy author, and my debut novel, The Bone Spindle, which is a gender-flipped Sleeping Beauty retelling, is coming from Penguin Teen in 2022.
And I'm the editor-in-chief of Desank Books, which is a small nonprofit press. We do a lot of experimental literary fiction and nonfiction, books that generally break the mold. So we really couldn't be coming at this from more different angles, but hopefully between the two of us, we can get you some good information.
All right, so we have a PowerPoint for you guys. So if you'll just bear with us for one moment while we get that sharing. Hooray! All right, you have finished your book. It's done. You typed the end. You are ready to publish. Now what? Where do you start? So the first question that you should ask yourself is, what are my goals for this project? What are my publishing expectations?
When we think about traditional publishing, we tend to think about the big five presses, which is like Penguin, Random House, Macmillan, Simon & Schuster. But there are also a lot of mid-sized and small presses, niche presses, micro presses, university presses. And then, of course, there's self-publishing, which we're not really going to talk about because it doesn't have anything to do with querying.
Another way to look at your expectations is to know what the genre of your book is, because the publishing experience and path might be very different for a romance author, a literary author, a poet, and a YA author. So if you're not sure what genre your book is, then I would suggest you start doing some reading and sort of see what kinds of books are like yours, and from there understand like how they get published and where you find these books. The next question you need to ask yourself is, do I need a literary agent to get published? Why or why not? So if you're aiming for those big five houses that Michelle was talking about, you will absolutely need a literary agent. For the most part, they don't take unagented submissions at all anymore. Whereas some of the medium and smaller size presses do still take unagented submissions, so you could be querying those directly. So when we talk about querying for the rest of the presentation, you could be querying an agent or you could be querying a small press, and that process is pretty similar. All right, finally, the last question to ask yourself is my book 100% ready? And this is mostly important because querying is kind of a one and done thing. Agents and editors don't want to see the same project over and over again, even if you thought of like the perfect new beginning for it, or you figured out like what was going wrong and you could make it so much better. Well, for the most part, once you've queried, that's over. So definitely you want to make sure it's as polished and as finished as possible so that you don't cost yourself any opportunities. All right, so the next question you might be asking is, where do I find these literary agents? I'm ready. The first place I recommend looking is the acknowledgement section in the back of books that you love that are the same genre as yours. When you find an agent in an acknowledgement section, you know a couple different things at once. You know that they represented a book that you love. You also sort of have this author testimonial rolled in, because agents are like wonderful, amazingly helpful people, and anyone who's got a great agent has thanked them profusely in the acknowledgement section. All right, the next place you might look is there's a website called Manuscript Wishlist that is basically just a place where agents and many editors go and they write like what they wish would appear in their inbox.
Yeah, so quick cautionary note, this can be really helpful. Sometimes it says things like, I would love more female friendships, or I'm looking for diverse voices, but sometimes they get a little specific. And it's like, I'm looking for the cats versus unicorns pirate adventure of my dreams. So this is not a recommendation to write to anybody's manuscript wish list, but if you're just trying to get a sense of what they like, what they're looking for, you can check that out.
Right. And then finally, there are agent roundups. A couple of websites that I know do this are Writer's Digest and Publishers Weekly. So basically, they just sort of do an article that's like, you know, up and coming new agents or agents who are killing it in the fantasy genre. So those can be good places to look for agent lists too. The next site that I want to mention is there is this giant site called agentquery.com, but I've even put in the PowerPoint that you must do this with due diligence, because it's kind of just this giant search database. And so you can put in the parameters, like I'm looking for agents who represent YA fantasy, and it will give you a list of people who it thinks are YA fantasy authors, agents. Sorry. But the reason that I mentioned it thinks that is because this list is not very carefully curated always. So sometimes there are people who are no longer agents, or who were never agents, or who have gone on and they're no longer representing like that kind of genre anymore. So it would be important that any list that you came up with, you did a lot of research to make sure that these were good agents still representing that genre. And the way to kind of do research on an agent is just kind of find out what books they've actually sold. You know, like who do they represent? And that's the way to look into an agent.
Yeah, remember that agents can be at all different levels of their careers too. Some will be just starting out and they might be able to take risks on books that don't necessarily fit the mold. Some will have more clout, more experience, more industry connections. So there are great reasons to work with agents at all different stages of their career. Just make sure you know what you're getting into and that you're working with somebody who's at the right spot for you. And then a quick note on small presses. If you're aiming for more of a small press, university press set, what you're going to see is that a lot of the books that come out from those places, portions of them have been previously published. Most writers have some publishing credits in small presses, in magazines, or have won some contests, and this especially applies to poetry and short story collections.
All right. So I'm now going to give you the basic anatomy of the query letter. And so this is just an overview, and this is a very fake query letter we've put up here for you. And this is by no means like the definitive or only way to write a query letter. It's just to give you, again, a sense of what's going to go on here. So the first section is the intro, and this will just have like the title of your book, the genre, the word count, and some comp titles. But what I wanted to mention here is I think in some ways the most important line is the first one, which should be some version of I am querying you because reason here. And this can be as simple as I'm querying you because I see that you represent YA fantasy, or if you found this agent in the back of a book in the acknowledgement section, this would be a great chance to say because you represented this favorite book of mine of all time.
Basically, this is a chance to show off that you've done your homework. As someone who reads a lot of queries, if somebody sends me a vampire romance novel or an amazing picture pop-up book, it could be the best vampire romance novel ever, and I still can't publish it because that's not what we do. So there's so much rejection in this business already. Don't set yourself up for heartache with somebody who could never have represented your book in the first place.
All right, the middle section, and many who find this to be the hardest section of all, is the pitch. This is where you somehow distill this entire novel that you have written down to a single paragraph. So this is like the fiery crucible in which all authors are forged. So there's a lot of advice out there all over the place because authors are often very bad at this. And so there's a bunch of sites out there to help you get better at this. But I want to mention that like it is really important that you do a good job on this and that you keep it short too. All right, and finally, that last little section of your query letter is the bio. So this is where you would put any writing credits that you have, those short stories that you may have gotten published. You can also put any relevant experience. You know, if you have a law degree and you are writing about a lawyer, that would be a great thing to put in there. But even if you don't have any writing experience or credits, I definitely recommend putting just like a little 1 or 2 lines about yourself. You know, just like, I love girl adventurers and heroes, and I write in LGBT positive worlds. And that just gives agents a little chance to know you, like a little flash in the pan of who you are at the bottom of a query letter. All right, next let's look at some query do's and don'ts. And so I'm pretty much going to take this one over because since she mostly receives the queries and I was mostly sending these, I definitely found out the hard way my query do's and don'ts. So how many agents should I send to? I honestly put this one on here, but it's a trick question because the answer is as many as you want to. Some people prefer a smaller curated list, and some people prefer to send very widely. But the only advice that I definitely want to make sure you take away is that just don't send to all the agents at once. Because if you send to your entire list of agents at once, and then you realize that you could have had a better query letter, or maybe you could have polished those first 5 pages more, you won't have a chance to make any improvements. You'll have just sent to your one and done list and it will be over. All right, so the second question you might ask yourself is it ever okay to like follow up and nudge an agent? And there's a lot of different schools of thought about this, but what I want to say is the most important thing to do is look at the agent's website, look at what they have written about how they prefer their communication. Many agents have written something called no response means no, and that means that you kind of just have to mark when you sent your query to them, mark how long they say they take to read them, and then like reject yourself as that time passes. And so, that can be a little rough, but that would be an agent who does not want to hear further from you. There are other agents who do write, I try to get back to every query, and those would be the ones that you would definitely want to, look at how long they would take, give them a grace period, but you might follow up with a very polite, respectful email about, I queried you on such date with my project. Is it still under consideration? All Right, next question is, what is an R&R and should I always do it? So an R&R is basically when an agent says, I have some interest in this, but I would like to send you some edits and see another version of it. So the important thing to understand about an R&R is it's not a guarantee of representation. This is just an agent saying, I'd like to see another draft with these edits made. And so whether you should do an R&R or not is completely dependent on whether you feel like those edits will make your book better, because you are getting actual feedback from an industry professional. So like, you should definitely look at what they've said and see if that applies to your book. And so even if they don't take it, then they've given you a chance to make your book better. And so just know that it's not the same as an offer of representation. All right, then another question is, can I ever query the same agent again? And the answer is yes, with a different project. And so particularly if there was an agent that you did feel like had a good response, or they said something about what they liked about your project, even if it wasn't the right fit, definitely put them down on a list and query them again with your next project. And even mention, I queried you once before with this other project that wasn't quite the right fit, but how about this one? And finally, what does it mean if an agent requests a partial or full? So a partial means that they'd like to see a certain amount of the book. They'll ask for the next 50 pages, or they'll ask for a number of chapters. The full means they want your entire manuscript. And again, I just want to caution you that this does not necessarily mean that you will definitely receive an offer of representation, but it is a good sign. And so someone asking you for these partials and these fulls is a really good sign that you should keep going, in my mind. And so finally, this is really not a query do and don't, but something I like to mention is, you might ask yourself, why does this take so long? Like, one of those things I wish I knew when I started querying was that, you know, a lot of agents' response time is somewhere between like a month and 3 months. So if you think about not sending to all those agents at once, you might be sending to the first few, you know, your first set of 10 or 20 agents, and then waiting 3 months to hear back from them, or longer, before you can even query again. And if agents ask for partial and full, sometimes they need even more time to read an entire book. So just like, be aware that like, it's because agents get so many queries and because reading a book takes so long, but this is like not a very quick thing. And so like, it is extremely quick for a very small number of people. And you've probably heard that story of somebody who got an agent like 2 weeks after querying and then a book deal right after that. But like, that is not the norm.
Yeah, if that is you, congratulations. You won't need any of this information, but it won't be most of us. So better to kind of gird yourself for the long haul.
All right, so next, right along with this, is like things I messed up that you don't have to. All right, so the first thing I want to mention is that you want to pick good comp titles. And the part that I messed up here is like, you might think that the best thing to do in a comp title is to pick something that's like really hot and that like everybody will know, but you can really go too general.
Yeah, sometimes if I see comp titles that are just New York Times bestsellers, all I really know is that you think your book's going to make a lot of money. Try to pick comps that help position your book more carefully than that. So for example, if you're doing a dystopian and you want to use the Hunger Games to show that you think your book has very strong commercial potential, maybe also slip in City of Ember or something that's a little bit more detailed and gives a better sense of exactly what your book is like.
All right, next, get a second and third and 10th opinion on that query. So you have like run the marathon that is writing an entire book. And it is really just, you want to keep going and not choke at the finish line. And I say this because unfortunately, the first book I queried that I did not get an agent with, I had a really terrible query letter. And I didn't know this. You know, I'm sending out this terrible query letter and I'm getting all these rejections and I have no idea why. And by the time I finally got somebody to talk to me about, you know, all the problems with my query letter, I'd already, you know, done that one and done, sent to a lot of agents and didn't have another chance with that. So definitely I think it's important to like get as many eyes as possible on that query letter and to make it as strong as possible.
Yeah, remember that a lot of times you won't get any feedback from agents if they say no. You won't know whether it's the book or the query letter or anything else. So making sure that your query is really strong is the least you can do.
All right, next, watch your word count. And so this is true of query letters. You know, now that I'm looking at this slide, this one's a double, because you don't want to have like a query letter that goes on for pages. Those are like about a page and nobody wants them to be any longer. But what I actually was talking about here is, again, something that I wish I'd known, is that different genres of book sort of have a different expected word count. And so one that's for YA is like between about 70 and 90,000, sometimes pushing 100,000 with those epic fantasy, but they don't really get any longer than that, at least not when you're querying your debut novel. And I was querying, again, that first project that didn't get picked up, this massive 127,000 word YA book, and I had no idea how monstrously long that was. And so I was kind of, I didn't really have a chance with that, and I had no idea about that until I was writing this query letter and found this out. And so one of the things I want to caution you guys is that, like, these is by no means anything more than a guideline. Like, this is like an expected query count. Again, you can find one of these on Writer's Digest. There's a lot of places that give you the suggested word count for different genres, and it's just guidelines. So in the query letter, this would be a chance to talk to an agent if you were much longer or much shorter than that. So if you have written the next epic fantasy YA Game of Thrones with 9 perspectives and it must be that long, just mention that in the query letter, because again, the agents are just looking to make sure you knew what you were doing and you weren't like me and just like writing whatever with no understanding that there even was a sort of expected word count there. All right, next is you want to make those first 5 pages shine.
Yeah, sometimes when you query agents, all they ask for is the query letter and the first 3 to 5 pages. So that is a lot of pressure on those first 5 pages, because that's what's going to decide whether you get the full request or the partial request. For small presses, sometimes this is longer. A lot of places, the standard evaluation length is about 30 pages. But in either case, you want to make sure that this is really showcasing your best writing.
All right, and finally, have your querying plan for the long haul figured out. And so, like I was saying about, you probably just want to make a decision ahead of time about when you are going to query agents and like when you're going to send out more queries. And that's, again, just to give yourself that time to revise, to improve the query letter, to just try a new query letter because you weren't getting any nibbles or bites with the first one. And so if you have a plan, you have a better chance of sticking with it and not sort of rushing it. Because I think that's one of the things that it can feel like frustrating not to get that feedback. And so you can be like, why don't I just send to the next 50 agents on my list all at once? But like, I really say, like, make a plan and stick with it. And that's kind of that's the survival tip here. That's like gonna save your sanity in the long run. All right, so I want to put some helpful resources on here because, we talked about how important that query letter is. And so you might be wondering, like, well, where do I even just start making mine better? And again, this is by no means comprehensive. There's so much good advice out there. So Jane Friedman is an author, and she also runs this awesome website that has a lot of information for writers just starting. It has a lot of like the basics of query letters. It has a lot of advice just on how you start with that. The second thing, and this helped me hugely, is the Query Shark is run by an agent who actually lets query letters get submitted to her, not for representation, but just to become better query letters. So with permission, she posts these online, and then she goes through these query letters line by line and explains how they could be made better, like what wasn't working, how to make them stronger, and the author keeps resubmitting until they have a good query letter. So you can watch a query letter go from like not very strong to an amazing query letter. And I think the value here, and it really worked for me, is if you are watching something get better, you can be like, oh, I do that too. So when she's saying you have introduced too many characters, you cannot introduce that many characters in a query letter. If that's something that you've been doing, you can like take that advice and apply it to your own. The next place to look is successful query letters by authors. These are up, sometimes I know Writer's Digest runs these, but authors are often very kind people who have put their successful query letters with agents up online. And the really useful thing about this, and then again, this is something that helped me immensely, is you can go find a query letter that's in the exact same genre as your book. So I went and I was able to look at how YA fantasy authors pitched their books, and there was a lot of voice in there, and that's not easy to do in a query letter. And I feel like there was no way to explain that except to look at this example of how voice was in there. So looking at those successful query letters can also give you like a really excellent in for how to improve.
All right, so then just a couple of other querying approaches to have in mind. We've been talking a lot about traditional querying, where you send an email into the void and you cross your fingers and hope. There are also these things called Twitter pitch parties. Agents and editors will pick a certain day, a certain hashtag, and they're going to scroll through Twitter, and you are able to use that hashtag and post your pitch for your book, and then hopefully catch somebody's eye. And editors and agents will like pitches that they want the book sent to them for. If that pitch paragraph of the query letter is the fiery crucible, I don't even know what this is. This is like the gauntlet, because now you have to get that pitch down from about 150 words to like 200 characters.
All right, the next way you can look at is there are author mentorships available out there. So again, since I'm in YA fantasy, I know some of these a little better, but there's this giant thing called Pitch Wars that runs every year, and it matches agented authors and authors that have books out with aspiring authors, and they actually take you through an entire edit of your manuscript and then sort of help you get your pitching materials ready for a showcase the next year. This is like also so popular that it's very, very competitive now. So it can be almost as difficult to get into pitch wars as it is to query at this point. But it's definitely a great opportunity. There's another one I know of called Author Mentor Match, which doesn't have that showcase. So like there's a little bit more flexibility. I think there's a few more genres in that, not just YA. But again, they'll match you with an author who's agented or an author who's already has a book out to work with an aspiring author.
All right, and then kind of weird note for right now, because this is how we're doing our writing conferences. But if you're really having trouble getting feedback on your pitch, one thing you can do is go to a writing conference and talk to an agent. Most writing conferences will have an opportunity to pitch agents or editors. This can be more or less useful to you depending on what agents and editors have come to the conference and whether they're a good match for your book. But one thing that is great about a face-to-face meeting is just the chance to read your letter out and get somebody's thoughts on it, and that can help you kind of fine-tune something that may not be working.
Yeah, even if an agent isn't interested in picking up your project, if you're doing one of those pitching in persons, they will always give you feedback on like what maybe they see in the query letter that you could make stronger. And so I just want to mention, because it's good that like if you have so many resources when available to you when you go to a conference, that I never recommend the only reason you go being that pitching session though, because like you have other authors that you could like do query swaps with. There are often many panels on how to improve that query letter, and so that's a great resource, but it is one of many resources at your writing conference. All right, guys. Well, thank you for listening. I hope that answered all of your questions on the basics of querying. Obviously, it gets a lot harder from here as you start writing that letter. I want to add on one last, just personal note that I absolutely recommend that you make a dedicated email account for querying, because if your email is anything like mine, it comes to my phone. And so when I was querying, I would be like just off enjoying my life, having a party, going ice skating. And this was before COVID when we did these things. And out of nowhere, a rejection would come and find me on my phone. And it was like an instant rain cloud on whatever happy sunny day I was enjoying. And so like definitely the survival and the sanity part, I say like make a dedicated email account. Promise you won't obsess over it, and like just only check it like twice a week and do not attach it to your phone.
Yeah, this can be a long process. It can be grueling, it can be disheartening, but a lot of people make it through. And writing is something that we all love to do, and you can do this. So thank you so much for listening to us. We hope to get the chance to talk to you in person sometime down the road. Stay safe out there.
Right. And in the meantime, I put my website here, leslievedder.com. It has all my socials on it. So if you are looking to connect, come find me.